I never thought silence could build a life, but it did. People say your name is the first thing you give to the world. Mine slowly disappeared, without anyone noticing. At first, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like relief. I was young when it happened, too young to understand what I was giving away. I thought I was being generous, thought I was being patient, thought I was doing the right thing. That's what I told myself anyway. It started with something small, a project, a moment, a decision made quietly, without witnesses. I remember sitting in that room, fluorescent lights humming above us, the smell of old coffee and printer ink in the air. My hands were shaking slightly, though I tried to hide it by folding them in my lap. He stood up before I could. He spoke with confidence, with ease, as if the words belonged to him naturally, and everyone listened. I watched heads nod, pens move, smiles appear. No one looked at me. When the applause came, it wasn't loud, just polite, enough to make the moment feel official. That was the first time I didn't correct them. I told myself it didn't matter, that credit was just a word, that recognition wasn't why I did what I did. But deep down, something shifted. Because once people believe a story, correcting it feels like lying. After that day, his name became attached to my work. At first, it happened accidentally, then conveniently, then intentionally. People started coming to him with questions I had answers to.
They praised him for ideas that had kept me awake at night. They thanked him for solutions that were born from my exhaustion, my doubt, my fear of not being good enough. I stood beside him in meetings, nodding along, smiling when expected. I became very good at smiling. There is a special kind of loneliness that comes from being seen, but not known. Every success he received made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. Because how do you complain about something you willingly allowed? How do you say, that should have been me, when you were the one who stayed quiet? So I said nothing. Days turned into months, months into years, and the story solidified. His reputation grew. Mine never formed. People began to introduce me as the one who helps, not the creator, not the mind, just the support. I told myself I was fine with that. But at night, when everything went quiet, I replayed moments in my head, the times I almost spoke, the pauses where I could have stepped forward. I never did, because silence, once chosen, becomes a habit, and habits become lives. I didn't realize it then, but by the time I noticed the cost, it was already too late. The world had learned a version of the truth that didn't include me, and correcting it would mean tearing everything apart. So I stayed quiet and let someone else take credit for my life. Silence doesn't always feel like surrender. Sometimes it feels like survival. After that first moment, I told myself it was temporary, just until things settled, just until the right time came. But life doesn't wait for the right time. The next opportunity arrived quietly, an email sent late at night, a meeting scheduled too early in the morning. They wanted his input again. I sat across from him as he read the message out loud, his voice steady, almost proud. He glanced at me for just a second, not asking permission, not checking, just acknowledging my presence, like a habit. "You're good with this, right?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. I nodded. That nod paid my rent 3 months later, because soon after, he got promoted. And when he did, I moved up too, just enough to stay close enough to help, close enough to disappear behind him.
People congratulated him in the hallway, shook his hand, clapped him on the back. Someone turned to me once and said, "You must be proud." I smiled and said yes. What I didn't say was that pride feels very different when it has no place to land. As time went on, my work started feeding his life. His schedule filled up. His responsibilities grew. His confidence became something people admired. And I became efficient. I learned how to speak just enough to support him, how to phrase ideas in ways that sounded like suggestions instead of ownership, how to pause at the right moment so he could step in and finish the sentence. We worked well together, too well. At home, my life became smaller. I stopped talking about work with friends because it felt complicated to explain. I stopped correcting people when they assumed I was on his team. I stopped dreaming out loud. There is a quiet grief in watching someone live the life that fits you better, not because they stole it, but because you handed it over.
Some nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying alternate versions of myself. The version who spoke up. The version who claimed her name. The version who didn't smile when it hurt. But morning always came, and with it, routine. Routine has a way of dulling regret. Until the day the check came, it was thicker than usual, an envelope placed gently on my desk. Inside was a bonus. I stared at the number longer than I should have. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to make things easier, enough to silence certain doubts. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. Silence was no longer just emotional. It was profitable. And once silence starts paying your bills, it becomes much harder to break. I told myself I was being practical, that recognition doesn't put food on the table, that pride doesn't cover medical bills or rent or emergencies. All true. But what no one tells you is this: when you let someone else take credit for your life long enough, you begin to forget how to take it back. I watched him buy a better car, move into a bigger place, speak on panels I should have been invited to. People started quoting him. They repeated my ideas with his name attached, sometimes right in front of me. Each time, something inside me flinched, then went quiet. Pain has a sound when it first appears. After a while, it just becomes background noise. One afternoon, a new hire approached me. She was nervous, clutching a notebook, eyes wide. "I just wanted to say," she said softly, "it's really inspiring to work near someone like him." Near. That word stayed with me. Not with him. Not under him. Near. I nodded, smiled, and told her he worked very hard. She thanked me. I sat back down at my desk and felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was acceptance. And acceptance is dangerous when it comes too early, because once you accept a version of your life that doesn't include your name, the world stops looking for it. And so do you. There's a moment when silence stops being neutral. I didn't notice it at first. It crept in quietly, dressed as opportunity. It happened the day his name appeared in print. Not in an email, not in an internal memo, in an article. Someone had written about his vision, his leadership, his original thinking. I read the article 3 times. Every paragraph felt familiar, not because I'd heard him say those things, but because I remembered thinking them. Late nights, messy notes, conversations I'd had only with myself. My words, polished by someone else's confidence. Colleagues forwarded the article around with pride. My inbox filled with messages that said things like, "Did you see this? We're so lucky to have him." I didn't respond. I sat there, staring at the screen, realizing something terrifying. The story had become official. Once something is written down, once it's archived, shared, cited, silence turns into agreement. From that day on, people stopped asking questions. They stopped wondering who did what. The narrative was complete.
and I was no longer missing from it. I had never been part of it at all. He started being invited into rooms I'd never see, meetings behind closed doors, conversations that shaped the future. Sometimes he'd come back afterwards, energized, talking fast. "You wouldn't believe what they're planning next," he'd say. And I would listen. I always listened, because by then, my role had shifted. I wasn't just quiet anymore. I was trusted. Trusted not to disrupt. Trusted not to complicate things. Trusted to keep the version of events that worked best for everyone else. There's a strange comfort in being predictable. People like you more when you don't ask for credit. They relax around you. They confide in you. They assume you're content. I let them, but something inside me started changing. I began noticing how people spoke to me, slower, simpler, like I was there to assist, not contribute. I noticed how meetings moved on without waiting for my input, how decisions were made before I entered the room. And I told myself it was fine. I had helped build this. This was the cost. The real fracture came on a Tuesday afternoon. A new project, a big one. They announced it in the main conference room. He stood at the front, confident, calm. And then he said something that made my chest tighten. "I've been working on this idea for a long time." I felt heat rise in my face. Not because it was a lie, but because it was the truth, just not his truth. Everyone nodded. Someone asked how he came up with it. He paused, glanced at me for half a second, and then continued. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't stealing from me. He was standing on ground I'd cleared for him, and I was the one holding it steady. After the meeting, I went to the restroom and locked myself in a stall. I pressed my forehead against the door and tried to breathe. This wasn't about recognition anymore. It was about identity. If I spoke now, I wouldn't just be correcting a mistake. I would be rewriting history. And rewriting history has consequences. People would ask why I waited so long, why I benefited from the silence, why I didn't speak sooner. They would question my motives. They might even question my credibility. Silence, I realized, had aged. It had roots now, and pulling it out would tear more than just the lie. So I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and chose the easier pain. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. There was work to do, work that would be credited to someone else. Again. It didn't happen all at once. No announcement, no confrontation, just absence. I noticed it when meetings started without me. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a calendar glitch, someone forgetting to click add. But then it happened again and again. I would hear about decisions after they were made, projects already approved, directions already set. People spoke to me like a messenger now. Can you pass this along? Can you help him finalize this? Can you clean this up? Clean this up. That phrase stayed with me because that's what I had become, not the mind behind the idea, not the voice that shaped it, just the person who made it presentable. One afternoon, a junior colleague asked me a question, something technical, something I knew better than anyone. Before I could answer, someone else said, "You should ask him, he's the expert." The room nodded. I smiled, but inside something cracked quietly. Not anger, not jealousy, grief. Grief for a version of myself that used to exist. At night, I started questioning memories. Did I really come up with that framework? Was I exaggerating my role? Had I imagined my own importance? Gaslighting doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it grows inside you. He never acted cruel. That's the hardest part. He thanked me. He relied on me. He even praised me, privately. "You're amazing at this," he'd say. "I don't know how I'd manage without you." And I believed him, because being needed feels close to being valued, but it's not the same. I began shrinking my ideas before they reached my mouth, editing myself mid-sentence, offering suggestions as questions instead of statements. What if maybe? Just a thought, but I learned to disappear politely. And the more I did, the easier it became for everyone else to forget I'd ever been visible. The real moment came during a presentation, a big one. Clients, executives, applause. He stood at the front again. Slides moved smoothly, words landed perfectly, because I had written them. As the room clapped, someone leaned toward me and whispered, "You must be so proud of him." I nodded. That's when I understood the truth. I hadn't just let someone else take credit for my life. I had slowly trained the world to believe I had no life to credit. And once that belief settles in, it's almost impossible to undo. The realization didn't come during a crisis. It came while I was brushing my teeth. I caught my reflection in the mirror and thought, when was the last time I disagreed with anyone out loud? I couldn't remember. That terrified me, not because I had become quiet, but because silence had started to feel natural. At work, I anticipated what others wanted before they asked. I delivered solutions before questions were formed. I stayed 2 steps behind, just close enough to support, never close enough to lead. And no one questioned it. That's how I knew the change was complete. One evening, I opened an old notebook, the one I used to carry everywhere. Margins filled with messy handwriting, ideas that spilled over each other, unpolished, fearless. I flipped through the pages and barely recognized the voice. She was bold, certain, unapologetic. She didn't ask for permission. I whispered out loud, "Where did you go?" The answer came quickly. "You taught her to stay quiet." Not intentionally, not cruelly, just gradually. Every time I let someone speak for me, every time I said it's fine when it wasn't, every time I chose harmony over honesty. I remembered the first time he took credit. I had smiled because correcting him felt uncomfortable, small, unnecessary. But comfort has a cost, and I had been paying it daily. There was a moment late at night when I imagined my life continuing this way. Years passing, my work everywhere, my name nowhere. People remembering him as brilliant, me as helpful, reliable, supportive, forgettable. That word hurt the most. Not invisible, forgettable. I realized then that no one had stolen my voice. I had lent it out, indefinitely. And the hardest truth was this: no one was going to get it back to me. I would have to take it, which meant risking discomfort, conflict, disapproval, things I had spent years avoiding. That night, I wrote one sentence on a blank page: I am allowed to take up space. I didn't believe it yet, but I was ready to test it. The moment didn't feel brave. It felt inconvenient. There was no dramatic buildup, no trembling hands, no racing heart like in movies. Just a meeting, a conference room, white walls, cold coffee. He was presenting our work, again. Slides I had built, ideas I had tested, solutions I had refined in silence. He spoke confidently. People nodded. And for the first time in years, something inside me didn't step back. It stepped forward. When he finished, there was a pause, the kind where everyone waits for the next slide. Instead, I heard my own voice. I'd like to clarify something. The room didn't freeze, but it shifted. I kept my tone calm, measured, professional. I led the development of this framework, I said. The results he's describing came from my research and implementation. No accusations, no anger, just truth. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. He didn't look at me. Someone coughed. Another person checked their phone. Then the manager nodded slowly and said, "Thank you for clarifying." That was it. No applause, no validation. But when the meeting ended, he pulled me aside. His smile was polite. His voice was not. "You didn't have to do that," he said. I met his eyes. I did. His expression changed, not to anger, but something colder, disappointment, as if I had broken an unspoken agreement. After that day, things shifted, subtly. I was no longer the invisible support. I was the unpredictable variable. Meetings happened without me. Emails excluded my name. Decisions were made elsewhere, not as punishment, as correction. And for a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Life was easier when I was silent, smoother, less complicated. But something unexpected happened. I slept better. Even as doors quietly closed, something inside me opened. I started speaking in small ways, correcting assumptions, adding context, saying I disagree without apology, not loudly, but clearly. And with each word, I felt less like a shadow. I wasn't winning, but I was returning to myself.
I thought the hardest part would be at work. I was wrong. The real cost came at home. He noticed the change before anyone else did. Not because I told him, but because I stopped shrinking. I stopped nodding automatically, stopped agreeing just to keep the peace, stopped absorbing everything quietly. At first, he said nothing. Then one night, while we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, he asked softly, "Are you unhappy with me?" The question caught me off guard. I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect him from the truth. But I had learned something important. Silence always asks for more silence. So I breathed in and said, "I don't know if I'm unhappy with you, but I know I've been unhappy with myself." His face tightened, not with anger, but confusion. "I thought you liked things calm," he said. "You never complained." That sentence broke something in me. Because he was right. I never complained. I had trained everyone around me to believe I was endlessly adaptable, low maintenance, easy, even the person I loved most. I told him how often I swallowed words, how often I felt unseen even while being loved, how sometimes I wondered if he loved me or the quiet version of me. He listened, but listening doesn't always mean understanding. "I didn't know you needed more," he said. His voice wasn't cruel, just distant, and that distance hurt more than anger ever could. Over the following weeks, conversations became careful, measured, as if we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing. I was changing, and change unsettles people who fell in love with your stillness. One night he said something that stayed with me. "You're different lately," he said. "I don't know where I fit anymore." I wanted to tell him he still fit, that I wasn't leaving him behind. I was trying to catch up to myself. But instead, I realized something devastating. The version of me he missed was the version that disappeared so others could stay comfortable. And I couldn't go back, not without losing myself again. Loving someone should not require self-erasure. That realization didn't make me strong. It made me ache, because growth doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like grief. The decision didn't arrive as a single moment. It formed slowly, like condensation on glass, barely noticeable, until suddenly it's everywhere. I didn't quit my job dramatically. I didn't confront him again. I didn't demand apologies. I simply stopped offering myself away. I updated my portfolio, quietly, carefully. I added the projects I had led, the systems I had designed, the results that had once lived under someone else's name. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't explain. I just told the truth. When recruiters reached out, I didn't deflect. When interviews came, I didn't downplay my role. The strangest thing happened. People listened. They believed me. Not because I spoke louder than before, but because I finally spoke without shrinking. At home, the distance grew clearer.
not colder, clearer. We had one final conversation, not a fight, not tears, just honesty that arrived too late to be undone. "I don't think I know how to be with this version of you," he said. And for the first time, I didn't translate that sentence into self-blame. I nodded and replied, "I don't think I can survive as the old one." We didn't part with resentment. We parted with grief, the kind that means something mattered. After he left, the apartment felt too quiet. But the silence was different now. It wasn't swallowing me. It was making space. I sat on the floor that night, back against the wall, and felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not happiness. Relief. The relief of no longer betraying myself to keep everything intact. Weeks later, I received an offer, a role that came with visibility, ownership, responsibility, everything I used to hide from. I accepted without hesitation. And on my first day, when someone asked about my experience, I didn't minimize it. I didn't hand it over. I said, "I built this." And nothing terrible happened. The world didn't collapse. No one punished me. I realized then, the cost of letting someone else take credit for my life was never about them. It was about how long I believed I didn't deserve it. And that belief was finally gone. There's a strange moment that happens after you stop disappearing. Not immediately, not dramatically. It happens when no one is watching. Months later, I was invited to speak on a panel. Nothing big, just a small room, a handful of people. Before stepping on stage, someone asked, "How would you like to be introduced?" For a second, my mind went blank. Not because I didn't know my title, but because I wasn't used to being named. I said my name out loud, slowly, clearly, and something about hearing it, connected to my work, felt unfamiliar, almost tender. I spoke that day without performance, without shrinking, without apology. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She said, "I didn't know you were allowed to talk like that without asking first." I smiled because I knew exactly what she meant. That night, alone again, I thought about all the years I let someone else take credit for my life. Not because I was weak, but because I was trying to survive, trying to belong, trying to be loved without being too much. I don't blame the person who took credit. I understand now that people will accept whatever you hand them, even your voice. What matters is the moment you decide to stop handing it over. Today, my life looks quieter than I imagined success would. No spotlight, no applause, just alignment. My name attached to my work, my thoughts attached to my voice, my presence attached to my body. I still choose silence sometimes, but now it's a choice, and that makes all the difference. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, if you've ever watched someone else live the life you built, I want you to know something. You're not late. You're not broken. You were just waiting to believe that your name deserves to be spoken by you.